When David Smallbone's company collapsed, he moved his family from Australia to the United States in search of a brighter future. He shares about his story in the new movie out about it, Unsung Heroes. God's response to Moses' complaints is a great reminder of his power, and Rob's dad wasn't around when he was a kid, so how he helped the next generation with the same challenges is his channel into the Hall of Heroes. Coming up on episode 69 of Manly with Andy. Now joining the podcast, David Smallbone, parents of Luke and Joel Smallbone, and Rebecca St. James. So two Christian artist powerhouses in the last 20 or 30 years. He also has a movie out about their family's journey in theaters now, just hit number 2 in the box office last week, called Unsung Heroes. And David Smallbone, I like to start every conversation with the question, what do you think is the biggest challenge that men face today, and how do we overcome it?
Well, I think the temptation, with social media, the evil one, the enemy is alive and well. And I think we've got to protect what we have. I think men are more selfish than women. And so we immediately look for gratification. And with social media, what it is, it's available to us. So I have this funny little thing. When temptation comes my way, I suddenly don't go that spiritual. I suddenly go Jesus is real, but I suddenly go, well, who's next door to me? Who am I seeing? Who am I living with? And I think, what will Helen think? Because if she said, see you later, buddy, I would die. She is so important to me. And I think the challenge is, how do we be unselfish when the culture, our physical flesh and the culture is encouraging us to be selfish? And I think we do that by reminding ourselves that when we decided to follow Jesus, we gave our life away. There's no better way to live. If we decide to go down the dark side, we're compromised and we're not going to have a full life. You know, I've faced temptation like every man has, but midlife, through the story that shows up in the movie, I saw the hands and feet of Jesus. And I lived in the wilderness in the industry for a couple of years. And I was loved on by the church. And that was my Damascus experience. I'll never forget that. So when temptation comes to you guys, remember what God has done. And that's what the movie does for me. Even I've been out promoting it. I've watched it probably 18 times now. It makes me cry every time because God is good. Mm-hmm. I'm astonished at his goodness. I'm astonished at how practical the Christian life is. I'm shocked sometimes that people want to embrace the life of the culture, not the life of Jesus. Had a friend die yesterday, young friend, close to my children's age. We'd talked to him a lot about Jesus, done a lot of life with him, but he had embraced an alternative lifestyle. And it's hard. But I said to my sons yesterday when we were talking about it, I said, in his memory, let's be louder about Jesus, because I love what you're doing on the station. Sharing the hope in Jesus loudly. I sometimes think we rely on you guys, we rely on pastors to do that job. We have a higher calling to talk about Jesus with our family, our friends, our business associates. I sometimes think because the culture is too strong, we've given that responsibility to KTIS and to our pastors. And no, it's all our responsibility as an Australian living in America. My worry about America at the moment, unless we get revival here, America's going to fall. So to counteract the temptation that comes to every man, my encouragement, get loud about Jesus and live the life. And I'm 74, I'm 74. I've had a wonderful life. In that process, I've lost everything. We had lots of kids. We had 7 kids. But the older I get, I'm convinced it's the only way to live. And I'm so glad that you're on the airwaves and you're number one in town, reminding both Christians and non-Christians how wonderful, how really wonderful this life can be.
Well, I think your life is a great example of that. You've been living it out, and so let's walk through your life that's now turned into this movie called Unsung Hero. What was your childhood experience like growing up in faith? Was there a faith background there?
Oh yeah, and it was so good. I took it for granted. Had wonderful Christian parents. I started in music, was 16. I kind of wanted to be in Christian music, but I was kind of in the world, and I had one foot in the world and one foot in the church, you know. And I worked at a TV station, mainstream TV station in those days. I was kind of living the life because I saw the example of my parents, but I wasn't passionate about it. Then I moved from Brisbane to Sydney, and 6 months later, I met Helen. I then worked in a mainstream record label, then worked at a mainstream a radio station. And I was kind of in church, but I was lukewarm. And I think it was the experience that shows up in the movie of losing everything, coming to America, then seeing when I couldn't put food on the table, the hands and feet of Jesus. It was the church, People's Church, now Church of the City here in Franklin, that put food on the table for me. And we still worked. We mowed lawns, cleaned houses, all the things people don't want to do. I came over to work for an artist, and he let me go after 2 months. And so that forced us to live by faith. And it was a Christian community that loved on us and moved this middle-aged bloke from lukewarm to passionate. And that was my Damascus experience. And it's almost like I recommend it to everybody because I've had a wonderful, adventurous life. I'm not a rich guy financially, but I'm rich in that I've lived the adventure of faith and have been, just like you, I've been allowed to be in the ministry, share the hope in Jesus through Rebecca and then through for King Country. And my main role and my wife's main role with both of them is how do we have perspective when it's all crazy out there? How, like Christian music is crazy. You guys know that. We're controlled by the corporations. Universal and Sony own the two biggest record labels. And so their values permeate all the way down. So my message to you guys at the radio station is make sure when those record labels call you to play the songs, you tell them the miracles that you hear from your listeners, where they hear a song. And that happened with God Only Knows. We had hundreds of people. You played God Only Knows. Hundreds of people who were about to commit suicide heard that song on your station and others, decided not to do it. And like when you and I can be involved in a life change, not sure it gets any better, does it?
No, let's go back to that moment when you were in Australia and you thought, I want to move to America. What was the thought process behind that? Did you feel like there was a spiritual part of that, like you were almost Abraham, leaving the land that you knew and God told you, go to this land and then I'll tell you what to do?
My mother-in-law knew that we were doing it tough. And so she wanted me to get into real estate. And I've got good friends who are in real estate. I had to be involved in something purposeful. And so I went to Helen and I said, hey, baby, I think the only way we can get ahead is to go to America. Because I was doing Christian music in a country that was post-Christian. And so I go to her asking that question, thinking, shaking in my boots, really, thinking I knew how important it would be, thinking she'd say no. And she said, and this shows up in the movie, she said, we'll go for 2 years. 32 years later, we're still here. And I think I knew that I could no longer do what I'd been doing in Australia. And since I'd left doing all the shows, no one has come after me to do concerts. This is the crazy thing. The King Country going back next month to do a tour, and looks like it's going to sell out everywhere. But when I did the tour that lost everything, I budgeted for 25,000 people, and only 15,000 people turned up, and that's why I lost. I needed 10,000 more tickets sold, $25. That's where I lost the $250,000. and lost the house and everything. Blow me down. We put on the King Country show 6 weeks ago. It sells 25,000 tickets in the first week. And I just thought, like, I'm around all these things. God's ridiculous sense of humor. Like, I helped start the Hillsong record label. And so Hillsong calls me up on my 40th birthday and said, we don't want you anymore, after me working on it for 3 years. And I was blindsided by that because it was on the morning of my birthday. But okay, I look back now, that was a good thing. And then a little later, I was going to come over and work for Carmen. And Carmen had sent over the airfares and everything. And just before we would leave to come, he called up and said, I don't want you anymore. Mm. And that, to this day, that was 33 years ago almost. Toughest time of my life, because I was going to have a job. I was struggling to put food on the table even then, even though it got worse when we got to America. So I went to Helen when it happened. I said, baby, we've got to go away this weekend. To this day, that's the toughest weekend in my life. But a miracle happened. On the toughest weekend of my life, God gave us another little baby. And I look back, and it was almost like I was holding on by a thread at that time. Even when I'm at my lowest level, God was still there. Hey, it was almost saying, he was whispering, hey, I'm still with you. And so that was we'd been told after number 6 we shouldn't have any more. And our number 7 child was conceived that weekend. And I've been, even that experience, and then coming to America, I've been allowed to live in the miraculous. I recommend it. And it's almost like, to live in the miraculous, you've got to be, there's out of James 1, it says, need a miracle, ask God. For a while there, I was needing a lot of miracles. And I think that for us men, I think that's healthy.
It's hard for us men to ask for help, though, whether from God or from other humans. So you get to America, things quickly fall apart. What brought you to actually ask for help from people around you and the church when you had nothing?
I don't think we asked. The one time that something extraordinary happened. So, and this is how God works in mysterious ways. This shows up in the movie. 31 years ago, Rebecca was to sign, and this was going to get us out of poverty. Rebecca was about to sign a deal with Word Records. We'd done all the paperwork and everything. And on the day we had to sign the deal, Word Records pull out. And so in the movie, that's the day that Helen and I both can't get out of bed. And we were supposed to get a $10,000 advance. So I have a buddy here in town, a songwriter that had been a kind of our benefactor. And in the movie, he gives us the car. I tell him what's happened. He comes to me a week later and he says, oh, bloke, I want to give you the $10,000. I hadn't asked for it. He just says, oh, because I'd told him the story. And I'm pretty shaken up. And it enhances my lack of self-worth. I'm a very low level. I'm feeling like a failure. And I go to him and say, hey, I've got to give something back. I'll accept it, but I've got to give you something back. So I said, would you accept half of Rebecca's publishing? He didn't have a publishing deal, didn't have a recording deal, didn't mean anything, but I had to do something to feel good about myself. He said, okay, I'll do it. He then went on to be a missionary in Ukraine. Over the next 10 years, that made him 250,000 plus. And that crazy story of God's economy, that's where I want to live. I don't want to live in boring show business. It's all so transactional. But I think we're in church, we're in community. People just knew we were doing it tough. That same guy, we didn't have a car. He also gave us a car. And what he'd do on Sundays, he'd take us to Chinese and feed all our family. He was doing very well. He was Sandy Patty's, one of Sandy Patty's songwriters, wrote Love in Any Language. He also Steve Green's songwriter. And I think what had happened is we were in community. So I'd tell him everything, not asking for anything. And I think he would let other people know at the church. And then the previous podcast I was on, that guy, he runs a men's ministry. One of his best friends, it was his wife that would come and put groceries on the table. And then when we started doing mowing lawns and cleaning houses, that happened because all the family were out mowing the lawn in front of our house here in Brentwood. And people would, and this is where the miraculous kicks in, people would drive past and then say, hey, can you come and do that at our house? And so we weren't necessarily in the ask. The one humbling moment that I will remember, and that's what you're talking about, us men not wanting to ask. So I went out with Greg Nelson, who was Sandy Patty's producer. I'd known him, and we had coffee. He had to go to the bathroom, so he came into the house after taking us out, saw that we had no furniture. He then went back to his Sunday school, unbeknownst to us, saying, hey, I found this family who are in this rented house, no furniture. Can us as a Sunday school class furnish this house? They did. 2 weeks later, 2 trucks turned up. They furnished our house. I do remember standing in the hallway gobsmacked because we weren't asking, buddy. It was, it's the wonder of Christian community. It's a wonder of the church. And so now I'm not necessarily a big fan of music business. I'm a lover of the church. And so in my small area of influence, I'm trying to bring the church into how we do music business. I don't succeed that much, but it's a goal of mine every day. I'm very loud about it. I'm very loud with the billionaire owner of our record label, very loud with the guy who runs our booking agency. My wife thinks I'm too loud sometimes because we'll go out for dinner and I'll get talking to the people at the next table. And I'm pretty good at getting it to a Jesus. Maybe I've got the gift of the gab. I don't know. Not like you. I'm not paid to have the gift of the gab. But that's the one negative she's got with me. David, we're out here having dinner and you're talking to people at the next table. You're supposed to be focusing on me. So I'm trying to become a bit more restrained at 14. I'm not sure it's possible, but I am trying.
It's an incredible journey, an incredible story. And you kind of just gave us, again, I didn't even have to ask for the synopsis of the movie because it's your life. And you did. And it's called Unsung Heroes if you want to check it out. But what's the one thing that you want people to get after watching the movie?
Go deeper. The movie is emotional for me because it highlights my weaknesses. They are exaggerated. But what I can say is that God is good. And at my weakest moment, when I couldn't provide for my family, he did. And I think my message to anyone who's listening, don't mess around. Go deeper with Jesus. Like I had to have everything taken away to get to that point. Don't wait that long. My only regret now is that I got serious midlife. But I almost had to go through that Damascus experience. And I think a follow-on from getting serious about Jesus is loving on your family. And that means not spoiling them, but it means giving your wife time, giving your children time. What us men do, we're sometimes so busy, we forget what's important. And what really is important is at home. I had I'll finish with this one comment. A guy came out to a showing that we did before the concert in Tulsa, and I happened to read the comments from the different people who had been in it. And he said, after seeing the movie, I'm going to go home and love my family better. And that meant a lot to me.
Now taking a look at the Bible, Numbers 11:18 through 23. Tell the people, consecrate yourselves in preparation for tomorrow, when you will eat meat. The Lord heard you when you wailed, if only we had meat to eat. We were better off in Egypt. Now the Lord will give you meat, and you will eat it. You will not eat it for just 1 day or 2 days or 5, 10, or 20 days, but for a whole month, until it comes out of your nostrils and you loathe it, because you have rejected the Lord who is among you and have wailed before him, saying, why did we ever leave Egypt? But Moses said, Here I am among 600,000 men on foot, and you say, I will give them meat to eat for a whole month? Would they have enough if flocks and herds were slaughtered for them? Would they have enough if all the fish in the sea were caught for them? The Lord answered Moses, Is the Lord's arm too short? Now you will see whether or not what I say will come true for you. This is such a beautiful example of God saying something, and Moses, who, he's seen what God has done, still questioning what God can do. It also goes back to God's people. After seeing all that God has done, still questioning what God can do. And there's a little bit of contentment here. There's a contentment issue where God's people, God was literally providing the food for them on the ground outside their tent every single morning, and that wasn't enough for them. They still were complaining, saying, God, why can't we, at least in Egypt when we were captives, we get meat. Why can't we get meat? And God finally says, all right, you want meat? I'll show you more meat than you can ever handle. This is like the ultimate paleo diet, but apparently it's too much. And then Moses says, well, God, even though you've done this in the past, I can't provide all of this. And I just love that response where God says, is the Lord's arm too short? Now you will see whether or not what I say will come true for you. And so that's a challenge for us today. And I've been thinking about this week. The challenge to pray bigger prayers. What is that prayer? And I decided to be specific. I've been a little behind on filing my taxes. I filed an extension because I have really crazy taxes. And I'm hoping and expecting for a refund, but I threw out a number to God. I said, God, I pray that my refund is this much, this big amount. It could be, I believe it. But when's the last time we actually prayed for things like that? And not just, oh, God, I hope I get a little bit of a refund, or God, I hope this happens. Let's be encouraged by what God says here to Moses, that his arm is never too short. And when we pray, we'll see whether or not what God says will come true for us. Now entering the Hall of Heroes, Rob Kenny, who was abandoned by his dad when he was just 14. So he had to learn a lot of things that dad was supposed to teach him on his own. Then with the pandemic, he decided to take some of the lessons he learned and just started to post a few videos on YouTube. The channel's called Dad, How Do I?, where he shows people how to do everyday things, like fixing stuff around the house or tying a tie. And these Dad, How Do I videos really took off. They have nearly 4 million subscribers, all looking for dad-like advice. And even though Rob's been through some tough times, he's now happily married with 2 kids of his own. His daughter even helps him manage his social media accounts. So because Rob is the dad that everyone wishes they had, even if it's just on the internet, he is officially entering the Manly with Andy Hall of Heroes. A reminder to dads, Mother's Day is just around the corner. Don't forget that. And don't forget Father's Day just after that too. And if you've got a story about how your dad really showed up for you, would love for you to share that with all of us. Just go to manlywithandy.com and click on the microphone of manliness. And then I'll be sharing those stories throughout the month of June here on Manly with Andy. Small acts of faithfulness change everything. And Drew Dyke will share how from his new book, Just Show Up. Moses shut down spiritual jealousy with a simple response, and he helped feed an entire stadium with a selfless gesture, and it's Boban Marjanović's shot into the Hall of Heroes. All coming up next week on Manly with Andy. Manly with Andy is a Wow God production, a ministry of the University of Northwestern St. Paul. Discover more at wowgod.com.